Hi, it's Dr. Parikh, and I'm talking about the revision process. The revision process is hard. It's something you may not have done very much so far, or you may have at most revised once. Maybe for you, revision has always been your teacher or professor has kind of corrected your paper for you, and you just have to make all the changes. Or at least has marked all the mistakes for you, and you just have to look up how to do it differently. Revision happens very differently for this class and this paper. Part of it is it's a structured process. You have to make a plan. You actually have to tell me what you're going to revise. And some students have said that it's actually, it's almost like they kind of revise as they write their plan, which is fine. It's really just, I don't care if you revise as you're doing the plan, if you do the plan and then revise, as long as you turn it in on time, I don't care. I don't think there's one right way to do it. And the reason I have the revision plan is because I want you to think in a very concrete and detailed way about how you can make your paper better. I want you to think about each and every section, to think about the feedback that I've given you, and to really dig down deep. So how do you actually revise a paper? One thing you do is to look at all the feedback you've gotten. So you get feedback every week from your reading group in those 3 discussions where you're giving part of your paper. So you've gotten a lot of little pieces of feedback there. You've also gotten peer review feedback. So you've gotten one peer, someone not in your reading group, so someone who hasn't heard you talk about your paper a lot, and they've given you a form with formal feedback. They've given you some suggestions in that form, and they've also made some suggested changes and given you feedback within that document. So that's a lot of feedback. I really recommend printing that document out, actually, to help you track. Again, I get very, during the writing process, I find that if I don't use paper, like dead trees paper, I get overwhelmed. Even though I live a very digital life in most senses, I just need paper. I need to see it out in front of me. I need to touch it. I need to cross things off. You can see even, right now for my video, as I'm making videos, I have a paper that I'm actually crossing things off on, because when jobs get really big and complicated, it's tough to do that all digitally. So you want to go through that. You've also gotten a lot of feedback from me. You've gotten feedback on your outlines. You've gotten some feedback on earlier drafts. And so especially as we look at this final literature review paper, where I don't think there's anything really new. I think I've seen everything in it at least once. And so you have gotten feedback on every single section. When you get feedback from me, there's 3 places you need to look. First, you need to look at the rubric. As I've mentioned, I took a lot of time to build these rubrics so that it would be very quick for me to go through them. And that's not because I don't care about you as an individual and want to do the best I can for you. It's because I have a finite amount of time, and there's only so much work I can do within a semester. And with tests, it's really easy. You just make some of the questions multiple choice, and in Blackboard, they grade themselves. But when it comes to a paper, I need to go through and give you the feedback. And so if I were giving individualized feedback for the entire paper, for one, there's no way I could be consistent. Definitely not from semester to semester, but even from person to person. And as it is, I try to sit down and grade all of an assignment in one batch as much as I can to make sure I'm being consistent. But having a rubric helps me quite a bit because I'm giving people the same kinds of feedback about the same kinds of things. It also lets me give a ton more detail than I would have time to write out, and it lets me break things down into several small assignments so that you get feedback early on points that are on assignments that aren't worth very many points. So then when we get to these 50 and 100 point papers, you've already gotten one round of feedback and gotten a chance to fix it, gotten a chance to ask me any questions you have along the way. So when you look at my feedback, rubrics are really important. You'll also see for almost everything, you'll get kind of 3 big comments from me. So 1, 2, 3, and you'll want to look at those and see what comments, and that's where I try to focus on what are the most important things for me to mention. And sometimes I'll be really brief in that because I'll think, okay, you've gotten a lot of feedback in other places. But sometimes I'll be pretty detailed there with suggestions of what, descriptions of what you're not doing well, what I want to see instead, and how I think you can get there. The third place to look for feedback, and that comes in that little comment box. It shows up as like a little thought bubble in your My Grades area. The rubric, I don't think there's anything to let you know that there's information there. And I can actually comment on individual rubric pieces. So make sure you go in and look at the rubric, because sometimes there's feedback hiding there that Blackboard doesn't really make obvious. The third place to look is in the viewing pane. When you upload a Word or PDF file, what it does is it lets me make comments right in the document. I can just pop a little button there and you'll see exactly where I mean the comment to go. That again, I don't think Blackboard really tells you, hey, there's something here. So always scroll through the entire document just in case I've given you feedback. It's your responsibility to look for all feedback on every paper. So as you revise, you want to look at another thing. Anytime you get feedback, look at it as soon as you can so you can set it aside for a day and come back to it. The nice thing about this class is that there's no like, hey, you just handed me 10 pages that I've never read before and I'm going to tear those 10 pages apart. That's a big reason why you do things like turn in just 2 paragraphs of your lit review so that I can get a sample of your writing and I can give you feedback in a small dose. I can give you detailed feedback, but because your writing was so small, the feedback is going to be small too. And you can fix some of these easy problems before you even write the next assignment. You can start off on the right foot for the rest of it. So when you look at feedback, look at all the feedback, set it aside for a day, and then look at it again, because it's completely natural and normal and expected that you would have reactions to feedback. Part of it might be frustration. I worked hard and there's still so much left to do. So it might be anger. You might think you might not like the way something is worded. And I find often when I don't like the way something is worded and then I go back a day or two later, I'm like, oh, that's really not so bad. That was really the emotions I was bringing to reading it rather than what's there. I work very hard to try to word things in a neutral, caring, supportive way. I'm sure that there are times that I don't quite hit that note, but I really do my best. But I know when I get feedback, I still follow these. I read through it. I am angry. I'm disappointed. I'm whatever I am. And then a day or two later, I look at the feedback again. And usually it's not quite as bad as I remembered. Usually I feel a little more hopeful, like, okay, I can do this. I can address this. You also want to look at it early enough so that if you have questions, if you don't know what I mean, if you don't know how to make it better, you can reach out to me. So a big part of the revision process is reviewing your feedback. Some other tips on basic how do you revise. It may be helpful to go back to your outline. Especially if you need to add details, if you need to really reorganize things, know that you might kind of have to you may have to really reorganize some sections. Typically when students don't do well on a final draft, compared to an earlier draft, it's because I told them to make a lot of changes and they just made the little easy changes. So know that you may have to make some big changes. And I put as many outlines as I can so that hopefully we can find those big issues before you have written it, but don't get too attached to any one piece of writing. When you fall in love with a piece of writing, you leave it in way too long, especially as you get to longer papers. You really have to be ruthless as an editor and be willing to let go of things. That's also why it's good to write rough drafts that are actually rough and quick, because people who, write just agonize over every line and try to make it perfect from the beginning. For one, it's unrealistic. You freeze up a lot, but also then when you've put hours and hours into a paragraph, it's really hard to just drop that axe and cut that paragraph out. When you are editing for just language, you want to read each sentence out loud one at a time. Often it helps to work backwards through your paper, so you're focused on each sentence as kind of like how for your article sort, we mixed all the article slips up so that you would focus on each one as a unique piece instead of as part of this article. When you look at each sentence as a whole, as one little piece, you're more likely to notice that something is a sentence fragment. That made me nervous. My computer just went dark, but I think I'm still recording. So you're more likely to notice each piece, and you're more likely to find your mistakes. Reading it out loud lets you hear it in a different way. I also highly, highly recommend doing it on dead tree paper. It can also be really helpful to go talk with someone, whether it's your friend who's really good at grammar, or whether it's going to a tutor, or whether it's bringing something into office hours with me. It's always good if you've made some efforts to revise it already from what I've already seen, because if you bring in what I've already graded, I'm like, I gave you as much feedback as I had, as much feedback as I wanted to give. And it's, when you come in to meet with me, it's not like I'm going to fix your paper. I'm going to help you start to recognize what kinds of mistakes you're making. And it's going to be definitely a very collaborative, active process. Remember that you're going to revise several times. It's going to go in cycles. And when you revise one section, you have to remember to, especially in a paper that has as much repetition, as many summaries as this paper has, when you change one thing, you have to make sure you change it everywhere else. It's really helpful to use the search functions, find, maybe even replace, so that you can, for example, if I tell you that you're not using the most appropriate term to describe a group, and I help you find a resource that says what a better term is, it may, you may need to do some searches to make sure that you find every time you use that term. The revision process, it takes time. It's something you're probably not familiar with, but hopefully after this class, you'll have a better understanding and can actually implement the revision process in other papers. Thanks. Bye.